The first thing I noticed wasn't a sound, but the absence of one. The kind of absence that feels wrong not because it's loud or sudden, but because it replaces something that should have been there. Something so normal and constant that you don't think about it until it's gone. And that night, standing just inside the back door of my uncle's rural house, I realized the goats hadn't made a single noise for longer than I could remember. They were always loud, not aggressively, not in a way that bothered anyone, but present, small movements, soft bleats, hooves shifting against the dirt, the kind of quiet life that fills the background of a place without you noticing it. But now, nothing, no movement, no sound, just stillness stretching across the field behind the house, where the small wooden pen sat under a weak yellow bulb that flickered every few seconds like it was struggling to stay alive. I remember checking the time, not because I was planning anything, but because the silence made me aware of it. 12:32 a.m. Too late for activity, too early for morning. That strange middle space where the world feels paused rather than asleep. I opened the back door slightly, just enough for the cool night air to slip inside, carrying with it the dry smell of dirt and something else I couldn't place at first. Something faint but wrong, something metallic that didn't belong to the usual scent of animals and hay. The light above the pen flickered again, once, twice, then steadied, and that's when I saw them. The goats weren't lying down, they weren't sleeping, they were standing, all of them, perfectly still, facing the same direction, toward the far end of the fence where the darkness thickened just beyond the reach of the bulb. No one of them moved, not even slightly, and in that moment, without knowing why, without hearing anything or seeing anything clearly enough to justify it, a thought settled into my mind with a quiet certainty that didn't feel like my own. They weren't silent because nothing was there. They were silent because something was, and it was already inside the fence. I didn't step outside. That's the part I remember most clearly, not because it was a conscious decision made out of caution or fear, but because something in me refused to cross that threshold, refused to move from the dim safety of the doorway into the open surface of the yard, as if the line between inside and outside had already taken on a meaning I didn't fully understand yet, but instinctively obeyed. I stayed there, half in shadow, half in light, watching. The bulb above the pen flickered again, slower this time, as if the electricity itself had grown tired, each pulse of light stretching just long enough to make the darkness between them feel deeper than it should have been. And with every brief dimming, the far end of the fence seemed to swallow more detail, more shape, until it became less of a place and more of an absence. That's when I noticed it. Not movement, not sound, but a disruption. Something wrong with the way the shadows settled between the wooden posts of the fence, like one section of darkness didn't match the others, like it held its shape too consistently, too deliberately, refusing to shift with the flickering light the way everything else did. At first, my mind tried to correct it, tried to tell me it was just uneven lighting, just angles, just my eyes adjusting to the low visibility. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became. It wasn't the light that was wrong, it was the shadow, because it wasn't reacting, it was holding. I leaned forward slightly, not stepping out, just enough to change my angle, to test whether the shape would distort or break the way a normal shadow should when perspective shifts. It didn't. It stayed exactly where it was, and then it separated, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a slow, deliberate clarity, as if something that had been blending into the darkness was now choosing to stop pretending, choosing to define its edges just enough to be recognized without fully revealing itself. A shape, low to the ground, longer than any of the goats, too narrow, too controlled. Its outline was wrong in ways I couldn't immediately explain, like parts of it belonged to something familiar, but the proportions didn't match anything I had ever seen. The spine arcing slightly higher than it should, the limbs positioned too precisely, too still, like they were placed rather than resting. The goats didn't react. That was what made it worse. Not a single one of them moved, not a sound, not a step, not even a shift of weight. They were locked in place, all of them facing that same point, that same shape, as if whatever stood there had already taken something from them. Not their lives, not yet, but their ability to respond. The light flickered again, and this time it revealed more. A slight lift of the head, slow, controlled, as if it had been aware of me long before I noticed it. And even though I couldn't see its eyes clearly, not yet, I felt something align in that moment, something that snapped into place without needing confirmation. It wasn't just inside the fence, it wasn't just near the goats. It was aware of the house, aware of the door, aware of me. I froze completely, every instinct tightening at once, not telling me to run, not telling me to act, but telling me something far more specific. Don't move. Don't step outside. Don't let it see you as part of this. The air shifted slightly, carrying that same metallic scent, stronger now, thicker, mixed with something damp and raw that didn't belong to the dry ground or the animals. Something that felt out of place in a way that made my stomach tighten slowly. The shape adjusted again, not a full movement, just enough to confirm it wasn't a trick of the light. A slight repositioning of its weight, a subtle shift of one limb, and then it took a step, not toward the goats, not deeper into the pen, but slightly sideways, aligning itself with the open space between the fence posts and the door where I stood. And in that moment, with a clarity that didn't need explanation, I understood something that made the night feel suddenly, dangerously different. It hadn't just been hunting, it had already finished that part. Now, it was deciding what to do next. It didn't rush. That's the detail that stayed with me long after everything else began to blur together. The way it moved without urgency, without the frantic energy you'd expect from something that had just been feeding or hunting, because whatever stood in that pen didn't behave like an animal that needed to survive. It behaved like something that had already satisfied that need and was now operating on something else entirely. The step it took wasn't loud. It barely made a sound at all, but it should have. That's what my mind kept returning to. There was dirt in that pen, loose ground, scattered hay, wooden boards along the edges. Anything moving across that space should have produced something, some kind of friction, some disturbance, some proof that it occupied the same physical rules as everything else around it. But when its limb settled, nothing. No crunch, no shift, no sound. It was like watching movement without consequence. And that was when I realized the silence wasn't just coming from the goats. It was coming from everything. The night itself had gone quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if all the small background noises that usually exist without notice, the distant insects, the faint rustle of dry grass, even the whisper of wind across the open land, had been removed completely, leaving behind a vacuum that made every second stretch longer than it should. The goats still hadn't moved, but now I could see them more clearly under the flickering light. Their bodies were rigid, not frozen mid motion, not startled, just locked, their eyes wide, reflecting the weak yellow bulb in a way that made them look almost glossy, almost empty, as if whatever they were seeing or sensing had already taken something out of them that couldn't be put back. I swallowed slowly, my throat dry and my body still half hidden behind the doorframe, unwilling to move further into the open because something about the way that thing had aligned itself just slightly, just enough, made it feel like the space between us wasn't accidental anymore. It had chosen that angle, chosen that position, chosen me. Then the sound came, soft, wet, wrong. It didn't come from the ground. It didn't come from the goats. It came from it. A faint, almost subtle pulling noise, like something separating from something else, followed by a low, irregular clicking sound that didn't match any animal I had ever heard. Something mechanical but organic at the same time, like joints moving in a way they weren't meant to. My chest tightened immediately because that sound carried information my eyes couldn't confirm yet. It told me something was happening down there in that pen, something I couldn't fully see from this angle, something recent, something unfinished. The light flickered again, longer this time, long enough for the darkness to nearly swallow the entire pen before snapping back into the weak illumination. And when it did, one of the goats was no longer standing. It hadn't fallen. It hadn't collapsed in the way a body normally would. It was simply down, as if it had been placed there between one blink and the next. My breath caught hard in the chest, because I hadn't seen it happen. There had been no movement, no struggle, no sound, just a change, and the shape hadn't moved, not visibly, still in that same low stance, still aligned with the fence, still angled slightly toward me. But something about it was different now, subtle, almost impossible to define, like attention had been released, like something it needed had just been taken. The metallic smell grew stronger, thicker, mixing with that damp, raw scent until the air itself felt heavier, harder to breathe, as if every inhale carried something I wasn't supposed to be this close to. Then another sound, closer this time, not from the pen, not from the fence. A faint contact, wood, pressure, not enough to shake it, not enough to break it, but enough to confirm something I hadn't wanted to consider until now. It was no longer just inside the pen. It was moving toward the boundary, and I realized with a slow, sinking certainty that whatever had kept it focused on the goats was no longer enough, because now it was listening to something else, and I was the only one other thing there. The sound of wood under pressure didn't come again immediately, but the absence of it didn't bring any relief, because once you've heard something like that, Once you've felt that subtle confirmation that something has shifted from observation to approach, you don't go back to uncertainty. You don't return to guessing or questioning. You just wait for the next sign, the next small piece of evidence that tells you how much worse it's about to get. I didn't move, not even a step backward, not because I felt safe where I was, but because movement now felt like a signal, like something that would confirm my presence in a way that simply existing in the doorway hadn't yet done. And some instinct deep inside me was still holding on to that thin, fragile idea that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been fully noticed yet. But that thought didn't last long. The bulb above the pen flickered again, longer this time, stretching the darkness into something almost complete. And when the light returned, the shape was no longer where it had been. My chest tightened instantly, my eyes scanning the space in a sharp, involuntary search, trying to locate it, to re-establish its position, because not knowing where it was felt infinitely worse than seeing it clearly. The goats hadn't moved, what remained of them, anyway, still standing, still facing that same direction. Only now, the direction was empty. For a fraction of a second, my mind tried to convince me it had gone deeper into the shadows, that it had retreated back into the darker part of the pen where the light couldn't reach. But something inside me rejected that immediately, because the silence had changed. It wasn't distant anymore, it was closer. Then, another sound, right against the fence this time, a low, controlled pressure, followed by a faint creak of wood bending just slightly, just enough to confirm that whatever stood there wasn't hidden in the darkness anymore. It was at the boundary. My breath slowed involuntarily, my body locking into stillness so complete it felt unnatural, like even the smallest motion might draw something irreversible. I couldn't see it fully, not yet, but I could see part of it now, between two posts, a section of its body where the light barely touched, revealing just enough detail to break the illusion that this was something normal. The texture of its skin, or whatever covered it, was wrong. No fur, no scales, something in between, uneven, tight in some places, stretched in others, as if it didn't sit naturally on the shape beneath it, as if it had been pulled over something that didn't quite match its own form. And the way it held itself, still, perfectly still, not breathing, not shifting, just placed. Like it understood the fence wasn't meant to be broken, only crossed, and then, slowly, it lifted one limb higher than before, higher than anything in that pen would require. The movement was controlled, deliberate, almost careful, and it placed that limb against the wooden post. No force, no sudden motion, just contact. And the moment it did, the wood creaked again, not from impact, from pressure, sustained, testing. My stomach tightened immediately. A cold realization settled in piece by piece as I watched that slow, unnatural interaction unfold in front of me. It was trying to break the fence. It wasn't reacting like an animal trapped or contained. It was studying it, understanding it, learning where the limbs were. The light flickered again, shorter this time, but enough. enough to show more. The head, partially visible now, angled slightly upward, not toward the goats, not toward the ground, toward the house, toward me. And even though the distance between us hadn't changed, even though I was still standing in that doorway, still half hidden in shadow, I felt something shift in a way that didn't rely on sight or sound. Recognition, clear, immediate, unmistakable. It knew I was there, not just in a general sense, not just as another presence in the environment, but specifically, directly, focused. The limb pressed slightly harder against the post. The wood responded with a deeper creak, and then it slid, not down, not off, but along the surface, tracing, mapping, as if the fence wasn't an obstacle at all, but a line it was learning how to cross. And in that moment, standing there in the doorway, unable to look away, unable to move, I understood something that made the situation shift again in a way that felt far more dangerous than anything before. The fence had never been there to keep it in. It had been there to slow it down, and now it was almost done learning. There's a particular kind of fear that doesn't come from what you see, but from what you suddenly realize you haven't been paying attention to. And as I stood there fixed on the thing at the fence, watching that slow, deliberate movement of its limb tracing along the wood like it was reading something written into the grain, something shifted in my awareness in a way that didn't come from the yard at all. It came from behind me. Not a sound at first, not clearly, just a disturbance, a subtle change in the air inside the house, like something had moved where nothing should have been moving. Something so slight it would have gone unnoticed under normal circumstances. But nothing about this moment was normal anymore, and my senses had narrowed to so sharply that even the smallest inconsistency felt amplified. I didn't turn immediately. This was instinct. Not bravery, not control. Just a refusal to divide my attention when I already knew one threat was in front of me, because turning away from it, even for a second, felt like giving something an opening I couldn't afford. But the feeling didn't fade. It grew. That quiet awareness that I was no longer alone inside the house, that the space behind me, the hallway, the living room, the darker corners where the light didn't fully reach, was no longer empty in the way it had been just moments before. My breathing slowed again, not by choice, but because something in my body was trying to minimize itself, trying to exist more quietly, more carefully, as if sound itself might draw attention in the wrong direction. Outside, the creature remained still, one limb still resting against the fence, its head angled toward me, unmoving, watching. Inside, something shifted again. This time, I heard it, soft, barely there, a faint, irregular tap, not rhythmic, not consistent, but close, too close, somewhere deeper in the house. My chest tightened immediately, a cold wave moving through me as my mind tried to process the impossibility of it, tried to align it with something logical, something explainable. But there was nothing to attach it to, nothing that made sense in the context of what I already knew. Because I hadn't heard a door open, hadn't heard a window, hadn't heard anything that would explain how something could now be moving inside a space that had been closed just minutes ago. The tap came again, slightly clearer. Wood. Light contact, not force, not impact, just presence. Testing. My grip on the edge of the floor tightened slightly, my fingers pressing into the frame without me realizing it, as if holding on to something solid could keep everything else from slipping further out of control. And that's when the realization began to form. Slow, heavy, reluctant. The thing outside hadn't been trying to get in. It had been keeping me looking out. My pulse spiked hard in my chest, my thoughts snapping sharply into place as that single idea rearranged everything that had happened since the moment I stepped into the doorway. The goats, the movement, the fence, the deliberate pacing, the alignment toward me. It hadn't just been feeding, it had been occupying my attention, holding it, fixing it in one direction, while something else moved somewhere I couldn't see. The tap came again, closer now, not from the far end of the house, not from another room, from the hallway behind me. My entire body went rigid, every muscle locking at once, not because I didn't want to turn, but because turning suddenly felt like the final step in something I wasn't ready to confirm. Outside, the creature didn't move, didn't react, still watching, still holding that same unnatural stillness, as if its role in this was already complete. Slowly, very slowly, I began to turn my head, not fully, not yet, just enough to shift my awareness away from the yard and into the space behind me, where the darkness felt thicker now, more defined, as if something had settled onto it. And as that movement began, the tapping stopped, instantly, completely. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was waiting. And in that moment, caught between the thing outside and whatever had just moved inside, I understood something that made the entire situation collapse into something far worse than a single threat. This was never one thing, it was never one presence, and whatever had just entered the house had done it without making a sound I could hear until it wanted me to. I didn't turn all the way, not at first. There's a moment when instinct and reality collide so hard that your body tries to stall between them, tries to delay the confirmation of something it already understands, and that's exactly where I found myself. Caught halfway between facing the yard and facing the hallway, my vision split, my awareness stretched thin in two directions that no longer felt separate. The doorway glass caught my reflection faintly. That's what drew my attention first. Not the hallway, not the darkness behind me, but the reflection in that line, thin, pane, beside the door, where the inside of the house overlapped with the outside just enough to create something unstable, something that didn't belong fully to either side. At first it looked normal, my outline, my shoulder against the frame, the dim light from inside shaping the edge of my face, but something about it felt delayed, not visibly, not in a way you could immediately point to, but in a way that settled into your perception and refused to leave, like the reflection wasn't fully synchronized with me. I shifted slightly, just a fraction, and for a split second, it didn't. It corrected itself immediately. snapped back into alignment so quickly that part of me tried to dismiss it, tried to tell me it was just the angle, just the lighting, just my eyes adjusting again too many things at once. But that explanation didn't hold because now I was looking at it directly, testing it, and something inside me already knew what I was about to see. I moved my head slowly, carefully, and the reflection followed, but not perfectly, not cleanly. There was a fraction of delay, a hesitation, as if it needed to catch up. My breath tightened instantly, my focus locking on to that single detail, while everything else, the yard, the creature outside, the silence, faded into the background for just a second, because that meant something was wrong inside, not outside, inside. I forced myself to look past the reflection into the hallway behind me, dark, still, empty, at least, at first glance. The tapping hadn't returned. No movement, no sound, nothing to confirm what I had heard just moments ago. And that was worse, because silence now didn't mean absence, it meant concealment. My eyes drifted back to the glass, to my reflection, and that's when it happened. Not a full movement, not something obvious, but something small, something precise. My reflection blinking, out of sync. A fraction of a second before I did. My chest locked completely, my body freezing in place as that single detail shattered whatever fragile sense of control I had been holding on to. Because reflections don't lead, they follow, they mirror, they respond, they don't initiate anything on their own. But this one had, and then it smiled, not wide, not exaggerated, just enough. A subtle, unnatural curve of the mouth that didn't match my own expression, didn't match the tension in my face, didn't belong to me at all. Every instinct in my body screamed at once, not in panic, not in chaos, but in clarity. Don't turn around. Don't face it. Don't acknowledge it. Because whatever stood behind me was using me to see itself. The air inside the house felt colder suddenly, heavier, like the space itself had changed. Like something had settled fully into it now that I had noticed, now that I had confirmed its presence without directly confronting it. Outside, the creature at the fence hadn't moved, still watching, still aligned with the doorway, still part of this. And that was when the final connection locked into place in my mind. The thing outside hadn't just been distracting me, it had been anchoring me, holding my focus, keeping me facing one direction so I won't see what had already made its way inside. The reflection moved again, that same slight delay, that same subtle independence, and then, this time, it leaned, not my body, just the reflection, a fraction forward, toward the glass, toward me, as if testing the distance, as if measuring how close it could get before I reacted. My breath stayed locked into my chest, because now I understood something I hadn't wanted to understand before. Whatever had entered the house wasn't moving through it the way anything normal would. It was moving through me.